Hello and welcome to the seventh and last part of the Art of Argumentation PowerPoint. This will take you on how to develop your own arguments, especially for paper 1 and paper 2. We've mostly been focusing on how to break down an argument that is provided to us for a paper 1 or research that we do for a paper 2. And even though we've been focusing on strengths and weaknesses, sometimes we get a little too adept at looking at all the flaws. So obviously that's not enough. You also have to compile research and be able to put forward your own argument about what you read. Whether or not for paper 1, you're arguing if a document is strong or weak, or for paper 2, you're looking at 2 sides of an issue or 3 sides of an issue and determining which side you agree with and why. So you want to be objective, reasonable, well-researched, and well-developed. This is what examiners are looking for, and they'll reward you with it in your exam marks. So we're going to talk about paper 1 first, and then paper 2. Paper 1 has 3 questions. The first one is a really simple, just bullet point list type of response that you do in 10 minutes. The ones that require more time are question 2 and question 3. So those are the ones we'll be working on more. Now, question 2 is a simple 2-paragraph response that asks you to assess the overall argument of document 1 in paper 1. So what you want to do in the first paragraph is begin with a topic sentence that clearly states, overall, document 1 is very strong because of, with some kind of basic rationale. It doesn't have to be very elaborative. You don't have to list every reason you're going to go over in the 2 paragraphs, but just overall, why did you deem it overall strong or weak? Then it depends on which one you choose. So let's say I felt that this document in this paper 1 was overall weak. You do still want to acknowledge some strengths because most arguments do have some strengths. So review 2 strengths and explain how each of those strengths helps to enhance the claim. Then in the second paragraph, you focus on what your main point is, which in this case is that it's overall weak. So you're going to review more weaknesses than you did strengths. I recommend between 3 to 4. But then same thing, explain how each weakness, in this case, instead of enhances, detracts from the main conclusion. You do the opposite if you deem the article to be strong. First review 2 flaws, and then you review 3 to 4 strengths in the second paragraph. Now, question 3 is more involved, and this one usually takes anywhere between 45 to 50 minutes to reply to. It's the essay in this paper 1, because now it's asking you to look at both document 1 and document 2. That can be on completely opposite sides of an issue or on the same side, but maybe they differ on the best way to solve the problem or something like that. So this one's going to require between 3 to 4 paragraphs. In the first paragraph, it's also very important to have a clear topic sentence that answers the question. And typically the question is phrased as, to what extent does document 2 present a stronger argument than document 1? It's always about document 2. So you have to say, to some extent, document 2 is stronger if you only felt it was a little bit stronger. To a great extent, document 2 is stronger if you felt it really was the better of the 2. And if you don't feel it was stronger, you still have to say, to no extent is document 2 stronger, because the question revolves around document 2. Then in that first paragraph, you continue to say, well, what side of the issue are they on? Is one pro or con, or do they propose different solutions or different perspectives on the same stance? And then what's their scope? Is one political and the other one economical? Are they both economical? Something like that, and explain how that's strong or weak. And then you compare and contrast the raven of both sources. In the second paragraph, whichever document you didn't feel was as strong, you go over it, and it becomes kind of like a paper 1 question 2. Review first strengths, in this case 1 to 2, and then 2 to 3 flaws. Corroborate if possible. And then in the third paragraph, you assess the stronger of the 2 documents. First, you evaluate the opposite of it, which is the flaws, and then strengths. Corroborate and add refutation. But make sure you don't do this at the very end. The examiners want to see how you find points of intersection between the 2 documents. So as early as you can, corroborate. Even if these 2 documents are on totally opposite sides of the debate, maybe they agree on the scale of the problem. Maybe they both mention the same example or the same scholar or expert. Maybe they both visited the same country. Find points of corroboration. But because whatever stronger document is what you feel to be the better of the two, then explain what point in that document was much better than a given point in the second paragraph. So overall for paper 1, use thinking skills terms. That is the reason we laid that foundation with all those PowerPoints. Be careful not to spend too much time quoting long sections of the documents. That's such a waste of time. If I find this evidence in this third paragraph, let me just quickly sum it up in my own words, because the point is for me to say, for instance, when the author presents the evidence by the United Nations, it is highly significant because of the fact that 30% of the oceans are in danger, blah, 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 for instance. So I didn't need to quote it. I could just quickly sum up. Also, please, this is just a little stylistic thing, but please use the author's names. For paper 1 on the top, you've seen that they provide you with Raven info and they have the author's name. So please use the author's name. Don't say it explains, the document argues. They're written by a person, give them credit. Above all, explain how each strength or each flaw enhances the MC or takes away from it. This is something that we're going to work on throughout the year, but please avoid just summing up what the point is or the evidence or the example. You have to explain why it's strong. Why does that work well to prove the author's stance? As for style, you also want to use transitions to enable a really smooth flow, especially when you're going from flaws to strengths, strengths to flaws, corroboration, refutation. You want to make that all clear. And please use synonyms. We mostly use, oh, this strengthens the claim, this strengthens the premise, or this weakens. There's a lot of other great synonyms like enhances, increases, heightens, or for weakens you can say detracts, decreases, diminishes, so on and so forth. Okay, let's move on to paper 2. Paper 2 is our big 2,000 word research paper. 35% of your overall grade for Cambridge comes from paper 2, so it's weighed really heavily because it requires a lot of research. So some basics on research. First of all, use a good variety of sources. Don't just use whatever the first Google hits give you. These tend to be pretty pedestrian, pretty simple, day-to-day kind of material, like newspaper articles or magazine articles. You may find a really good one, but not all your sources should be like that. Also use academic material that you get from our school's database, but also from Google Scholar, for instance. Use mostly secondary sources because those tend to have the arguments, but primary sources are good. Like if you read a secondary source that mentions a study, go find that study and see what the author's conclusions of that study was. That can help with corroborate. Remember that primary sources are first-hand accounts, polls, studies, interviews. So these can serve as supplementary material or material that I want to corroborate, but typically they're not my main source. Secondary sources are not first-hand, but are an argument that is reached by the author or the researchers after a lot of research. And these are usually academic articles or encyclopedia entries. Be sure articles are up to date as possible and rely on valid information. Now, it does depend on the topic, but especially if you found your topic to be about medical technology, scientific endeavors, you want it to be as up to date as possible. If it's something that's a little older, if you're talking about late-term abortion, for example, that debate hasn't changed too much. There's not a lot of new research on it. You could probably go a little more back, like 15 years. And look to see their bibliography. First of all, that tells you, oh my God, their bibliography is 3 pages long. They clearly did their work. They're credible. And you can also find some sources by looking at that. So that's always helpful. So for paper 2, once you decide on a topic, first of all, how do you feel about it? Before you delve into too much research, how do you initially feel about that? Because you're going to have to write about that in the conclusion. Then establish the perspectives and decide on a question. Most of you are going to decide on a simple 2-perspective question, a yes or no, a pro or con type of thing. So you're going to word these as, should late-term abortion be allowed? Should governments control the internet? Things like that. Or is blah, blah, blah ethical? And another way to really do it, if the issue is a little more complicated, is do the benefits of blank outweigh the risk? Do the benefits of medical AI outweigh the risk, for example? If you do a 3-perspective question, then there's really only one way to phrase it, which is, under what circumstances, if any, should blank be allowed? Those are for issues where there seems to kind of be a middle ground that might be better. So, for example, minors and whether or not they should be allowed to make their medical choices. You can see how in most circumstances that sounds bad, in some it sounds good, but maybe there needs to be something in the middle where under certain conditions, yes, minors should. So then that's when you would want to say under what circumstances, if any, should minors be allowed to make their own medical decisions. Then you start doing your research and you want to have 1 to 2 sources for each perspective that you chose. So if you do the 2 perspective is blah, blah, blah ethical, you're going to have 2 sources pro, 2 sources against. If you did the 3 perspective, under what circumstance, if any, then you only do 1 main source. But you want to make sure you do supplementary. The reason I limit the number like this is because of the word count. 2,000 words sounds like a lot initially. Once you start doing the research and you realize how much you have to write, it's really not that much. Then, of course, you read through everything really, really carefully and you're annotating, highlighting as you go, especially looking for premises, key pieces of evidence, representative examples, and already annotate using thinking skills terms because you're going to use that in your essay. When you move on to other sources, look for reasons, examples, evidence, similar experts that are brought up in both of the articles because that's already corroboration. Or once you know what side you're on and you're reading the article on the opposing side, look to see things that you can refute. In continuation, once you've read everything and you've annotated, highlighted, then start to organize all your information informally at first. That's my piece of advice. You can use note cards, or what I like to do is, as I'm reading through everything, I'll copy and paste it over to a Word document with my citations. I already have my citations in place, so I don't forget where I got this from. And then once I'm all done, I can start organizing things that I feel should go together. Then you organize it into an outline, which I will teach you how to go through that very minutely. And then you draft. You need an introduction, obviously. You assess the reliability of every main source. You review the main points, evidence, premises, or evidence, or examples, of every main source. While you evaluate, using thinking skills terms, you corroborate, you refute, and at the end you have a reflection and a conclusion. And then, of course, like any essay, we revise and edit. We will do these in groups and in pairs constantly throughout the